Hi, Sal. Welcome to The Belief Show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Senya.
Great to have you here. I know people know you, but I'm going to tell them a couple of things about you before we start, and then we'll hop right in. We're here today with Sal Khan. He's the founder and CEO of Khan Academy. You've likely been there. You likely know it. It's a nonprofit educational organization. It offers free lessons in math, science, and humanities in multiple languages, as well as tools for parents, teachers, and districts to track student progress. It's a great site. It's an amazing place. I will show it to you for a second. You have likely all been there. You've clicked on the courses section. We know what we're talking about, but I am thrilled more than anything that we are here today with Sal. Hi there.
Hey, Senya.
So let's start with the silly questions. First silly question. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Depends what time in my youth you would have asked me. I think if you asked me when I was 5 or 6 years old, I would have said cartoonist. Then probably if you asked me in late elementary school or middle school, I might have said architect. So there's a theme. I definitely liked sitting around drawing buildings all day. I would draw actually like bridges and infrastructure, which was a little strange. And then if you asked me in high school, I probably would have said theoretical physicist. So it's gone through, and there's a little part of high school where I would have said heavy metal singer too, but I never really took that. I never thought that was really
seriously. When is the last time you drew a bridge?
Probably in the last week. I still draw bridges when I'm bored.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Good to know. Next of the three upfront questions, what is one of your favorite foods?
Fruits?
Foods.
Favorite food. I mean, I've got to say my guilty pleasure right now is I get these ketogenic ice cream bars from Costco that I have like one a day. Those are like my treat of the day. They're quite, I mean, there's like three grams net carbs. They're delicious.
It's awesome. That's great. And last of these, high school can be a challenging time. What was a good part of high school for you?
Oh, I had a lot of good parts. I mean, I had so many great friendships, which, broadly speaking, I think was the best part of high school. But, I also got to be, it might not surprise folks that I was a little bit of a math nerd. And so I was, we got to do a lot of tutoring as part of the math club, which I led in high school. And we got to drive around and kind of tour the country for like these national math competitions. So that was fun. But I could keep listing. I mean, there's stuff that was probably suboptimal, but there's a lot that was really good.
Very, very cool. Welcome to the Belief Show. And the overall question that we'll dig into is, what is it that you believe that others may not agree with you about?
What do I believe that others might not agree, that I'm willing to share?
Well, you've already shared your guilty pleasure of the keto bar, so
yeah, that's less controversial. Can anyone disagree with? I mean, it's a win-win, ketogenic and delicious. But what do I believe that other people might not? I mean, I do believe that all people, and this could be controversial, actually can be very good. Now, there's people that do horrible things and say horrible things that we might not agree with, that, whatever. But I do tend to have a very strong optimism about, individual humans. And I also have a lot of optimism for humanity, where, statistically, we know that humanity is getting better, even though when we look locally, like in our local time period, it always feels like things are falling apart. So yeah, I tend to be very optimistic about humanity and human beings.
And when you say that, what do you mean by I tend to believe that almost anybody can be good? What do you mean by that?
I mean, let's just imagine, who we would categorize as, some of the worst people on, there's historical figures that come to mind that were pretty bad. There are people, and I don't want to go into dark places, but you could imagine serial killers and, all of these people who, objectively speaking, any of us would say, okay, society needs to protect themselves at minimum from some of these folks. But I also believe that if you were to sit down and have a conversation with that person, there's aspects that you would find that are interesting and good. And once again, that doesn't somehow wash away some of the horrible things that they might have done. And I do believe that there are folks that either historical figures or individual actors that you have to society has to protect itself from, because they might have their brains might have gone in strange directions. But that's why I have a general optimism. And obviously most people that we know aren't serial killers. They are not dictators. They're just normal people. And, you can get frustrated with someone on the highway because they cut you off, or, someone at work who you feel is being political, or a family member who you think is being unreasonable and, holding grudges. But, that level of what we tend to judge people for, I think all of those people are very redeemable and have a lot of good to them if we just kind of keep ourselves open to them and maybe suppress our own egos and need to be right.
It's so interesting that you say that. A lot of the people who watch our broadcast are people who are in technology, either managers or individual contributors. And a lot are people who have had some exposure to positive psychology and even strengths, just focusing on people's strengths. And some of what I'm hearing you say is, even if you're in a disagreement with somebody, if someone's holding a grudge against you or you're holding a grudge against them, you may be able to look at their good qualities, like you're saying, or at their strengths. What's amazing about those people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also guilty of judging people and sometimes saying, oh, that person, they're like this. And, but I remind myself that, what I'm reacting against is the model I have of them in my mind, and probably the fact that model is not getting along with my own ego. And so it helps me step away from it a little bit to just realize that, we're all just a bag of water and atoms and, trying to interact with each other. And so that kind of, I take it less personal then.
A bag of water and atoms, just having keto pops when we can find them.
That's right.
Well, how did you come to this belief?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it's worked for me. I've gone into many situations in my life, starting from a young age, where if I assumed negative intent on the other party, and there might have been a few early data points where I could have assumed negative intent, it probably would have not been a good situation. But by being open to them, by speaking to them as, you would speak to a family or a friend, being open to them in that way, it's always served me well. And I've only continued to double down on it in life. When I meet people or when I do interviews like this, I try to just be myself. I try to treat other people just like human beings. And I find that it brings out a vulnerability and authenticity that we all want to be. But so many times in our life, we all have these things that we're trying to project or be. So I guess it's worked for me to assume that. So I will continue to assume it.
Yeah, we're here with Sal Khan, and if you have questions for him, type them in. But what we usually ask at this point in the show is, what is a takeaway you're starting to have from what Sal is saying? So suppose people have joined us and they're starting to think, all right, I might go with Sal's belief. It's not quite my overall belief about life, but suppose I'm open to exploring it more. What are some actions that you might recommend for people who want to actually explore your belief more, to see if that fits with their own beliefs?
Well, I mean, take any advice from me with a grain of salt, or a huge grain of salt, a big, cube of salt. But you try it out. I'll give an example. When I first went to business school, I remember I kind of went with kind of this open-minded, gee whiz kind of, and business school sometimes had stereotypes of people who are very ambitious and who are like kind of cutthroat. But I went with this assumption that, no, this is just a bunch of interesting people from different walks of life who are looking to spend, a couple of years exploring themselves, learning. And then when I went to business school, I remember sitting in I believe it was my study group, and I was telling one of my new friends, like, this place is amazing. Like, people here are so open and they're so caring about each other, and they're really here just to help each other. They really go against all the stereotypes of business school. And then I remember her telling me, what are you talking about? Everyone here is so cutthroat. They're just in it for themselves. Like, you can't trust anyone here. And I'm like, are we in the same place right now? and it was really, I think, the lens that you view things in, and you know, if you go on your defensive because you think other people are out to get you, then they will naturally be less trusting of you because you look like you're on guard. But if you're willing to step out a little bit, be a little vulnerable, and you know, it's always hardest to be the first person on the dance floor, so to speak. But if you're able to do that, it lets everyone else kind of lay their guard down. So, you know, try assuming, you know, not just acting as if people are good, but assuming in your head, tell your head, no, head, you're wrong. People are fundamentally good, and they are my friend, and they will be my well-wisher. And I just have to expose myself to them, be vulnerable to them, and then most people will reciprocate.
That's such a stark contrast of what you expected and what you found, and what your colleague in the same group expected and found. It's just such a night and day.
No, absolutely. And I have to say, by, you know, within a few weeks, she had kind of melted too, because our study group, which was like 6 or 7 people, was like,
Great.
we were very open and authentic with each other. And so I think a lot of, you know, her assumptions about the way the world works started to, you know, it just spreads the positivity. If someone has a negative experience, it just reinforces this, like, oh, the world, it's a cutthroat place. Everyone's out to get everyone. It's a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. But then if there's a little bit of kindness, a little bit of pay it forward, a little bit of openness and vulnerability, people are like, oh, maybe I can be that way too, because it feels a lot better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. A colleague of mine once told me that she was in a writing program, and it could be cutthroat, and so she always made an emphasis to be one of the first people critiquing with a positive comment, just to kind of start that role of positive intent going for everybody.
That's amazing. I would have never imagined that a writing program is cutthroat, but I guess it is. Why not?
What about, so sometimes when we have a strong belief, one of the things that happens is we run into people that have an opposite belief or a very distant belief. What about when you approach the world in this positive intent and you just run up against a person who sees it quite differently? What's that interaction like, or what does that do for you?
Yeah, you know, I think it's frankly gotten easier for me over the years. You know, when I was in high school or college, and you come up with someone who I would say has a more and then, you know, there's definitely aspects of my life that I have also been cynical, and I have also fallen into negativity. So I don't want to make it sound like I've been a, you know, this Care Bear my whole life. I was a lead singer of a death metal band in high school, so I clearly had anger issues.
This Care Bear my whole life.
Nothing more cathartic than a mosh pit for me when I was 16. So I clearly needed some release, and there you know, there's things. So I guess that's one way of coping. I found releases, and I think, you know, but yeah, whenever the tool that I've done is, you know, you can't force a worldview onto someone else, and we've all found ourselves in arguments with people on one side or the other, trying to project a view onto someone else, and they're probably trying to project a view. So, you know, I think over time you learn to just not to say what you believe and offer it to people, do it authentically and genuinely, and genuinely care about the person you're talking to. Don't just try to win an argument. That helps. Yeah, I think that's kind of the bit, you know, and be vulnerable. And then I think people slowly will open up. But, you know, I do think there is a, you know, for better or for worse, we live in a society that has like social validity. And so as Khan Academy, you know, as I started doing, you know, better in school, or got a good job that you know, society thought was a good job, or, you know, Khan Academy started becoming successful, it's easier for me now to do things that are a little bit more, you know, seemingly, you know, strange, and people will accept it. So I fully recognize that.
So what you're saying is actually seeing positive intent is a little bit strange, but it's okay at this point. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying something?
Yeah, well, all sorts of things. Like, you know, as you know, by society standards, as you get more validity or better reputation, you realize that you do have more power to kind of break norms, hopefully in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll give an example of like, you know, I take having my evening time with my family very seriously. And I think we all, you know, have felt pressures in our life of, oh, the rest of the team is meeting at 7 p.m. or they want to get that thing done by tomorrow morning, and I can't look like I'm not. And obviously sometimes you do need to be there. But you don't want to tell them the reason why you don't want to attend that meeting is because you want to, you know, you want to watch Super Y with your child, or you told them you'd play Monopoly, or something like that. But as you become a leader, or as you have more validation, you realize you can start being very open about these things. So like, I've been on panel discussions where I said, hey, I got to go and help give my kid a bath. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm like this super amazing domesticated dad that does everything. There's a lot to be improved upon, but I think it's a very powerful signal when you're just open with people. Like, hey, I got to go because I can give my kid a bath, or is it okay? I need to use the restroom. Like it's a
yeah. It's so funny you say that. I was doing some research on bravery at one point, and literally, like, just in a crowded room, it's kind of, there's a pressure to hold your bladder for the whole 2 hours, and it's even a tiny little increment of bravery just to say, hey, excuse me, I'm gonna go, I'll come back. Yeah,
I absolutely, and I think that gives permission to other people, for other people to do that.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. For the people who have been here with us and watching with us, what is a thought that you would like to leave them with?
A thought that I would like to leave them with. Well, one thing that I like thinking a lot about is there's so many lenses that we look on the world, and like, we've all been kind of programmed of like, okay, we are these human beings, we have this life, we go on this trajectory with our education, our careers. There's all of this kind of checkbox stuff that we're supposed to do: get our education, get a down payment on a house, have kids, go through the life cycle, send the kids to college, retire, die. And it's the thought I'll leave is just like, every now and then it's really powerful to just take a step back and just kind of view it all as if you were an alien, and say like, what is this? What are we trying to do here? Like, let's make sense of this. Like, what am I? I'm like some kind of, all of reality. And I know, Senya, we talk a lot about this outside of this setting. All of reality is just occurring in my mind. Even my brain is a concept in my mind. And the same reality, or with seeming objective reality, can be so different depending on how you perceive it. So I think every now and then to just take a step back and try to view things from the macro. It can be, in some ways it can make you feel small, but in some ways it can make you feel very big. It tends to give me a sense of peace when, while meditating, I realize, hey, I'm just an awareness. This salness, this, my gender, my ethnicity, my nationality, my degrees, my titles, they're really just these mental constructs. All I am really is this awareness that is going to be around. All I know is I'm around for the moment. I think, I project, I have these constructs of when I'm going to be around and all this. But when you do that, I don't know, all sorts of interesting things about life. You're like, well, why couldn't we do this or that? Why couldn't this be possible? Why couldn't I connect with people in that way?
So I have a question about that. Are you saying, I'm hearing you say people should just give themselves permission to take a 30,000-foot view. Now, do you mean deliberate thinking or not deliberate? And I ask that because there's a way you can just step back and say, what is my life about? What else do I want my life to be about? That's a little more deliberate. Or you can just step back and say, I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk every day with no agenda, just by myself, and just have thoughts. Are you saying both? Are you saying one or the other?
I think both. And, they obviously can relate to each other. I remember I had a very stressful time in 2008. This has kind of been edited out of most of the histories of Khan Academy's journey to, or Sal's journey to Khan Academy. But there was a time where I started to start my own hedge fund. It was called Khan Capital. I had worked for my first boss and my first hedge fund boss was Dan Wohl. It was Wohl Capital. He retired. So he's like, hey, Sal, you should start your own fund. I was like, I like working for you, Dan. I don't need to start, but I started it and I took on a lot of his cost structure. But I was trying to raise money for it. And so we weren't able to raise the money. So I was bleeding a lot of money, just paying for the office and the team and all of that. And during that very, very stressful time, I started taking walks out here and, the foothills of the Santa Cruz foothills, which is close to where we both live. Most people don't realize we live like literally, if I yell loud enough out of my window, you'll probably hear me.
Hey!
We should try that. But I found that when I took like 2-3 hour walks in the woods and I didn't see anyone else, didn't have any technology, and I just realized that I'm just some type of entity in the woods, that squirrel does not know that I'm bleeding, $20,000 a month. And what I was saving as a down payment on the house was quickly not becoming a down payment on a house. It didn't know that. It didn't project, hey, Sal, you should be successful. You should not be successful. It didn't know I'm Sal. It probably doesn't even know my gender. So when you start to think, and that tree definitely doesn't know any of this about me, it does let you start having that big picture, and shedding all of these things that we normally take so seriously. And then it does give you both peace, but it allows you to think a little bit more, a little larger.
So what did they do for you? What did these 2-hour walks in the woods do for you?
Oh, it just gives you complete, normally, or I think a lot of folks, your mind is constantly, cycling between various thoughts of to-dos, stresses, worries, what people think of you, how you're going to improve, what you think of yourself, judging. I mean, your brain is just constantly doing that. And as you know, I've last 2-3 years, I've started meditating very seriously. But I say seriously, like religiously, but I take it very lightly when I do it. That's one of the tricks. But once again, when you're in the woods, I know the Japanese have this concept of tree bathing, which is essentially just hanging out around trees, which really has the same effect, because when you're just you and trees, a lot of these social artifacts over time, these neurons that are firing start to get a little quieter and quieter and quieter. And then you're just a being among other beings in this universe. And yeah, it gives you perspective.
You had mentioned it as a way that you got to a calm place when this was going on with Con Capital, with your hedge fund. Did it directly help you make some decisions about it? Did it indirectly? How did it influence you with respect to the problem that was in front of you at the time?
It does. I mean, I even when that was there, and I was already doing Khan Academy as a, even in those weaker moments, I'd be like, oh, maybe I should work on this Khan Academy thing. But I'm like, no, how are you going to pay like your mortgage and all this other questions? But it does let you just say, look, Sal, or whatever you want to call yourself now that no one's watching. All you can do is what you think is right. And then the chips fall where they do, and just accept it. And if you accept it, it's not going to be bad. It is what it is. And then you just take the right next step, what you think is the right thing. And eventually I did have to shut that down, and I got a job, luckily, at another hedge fund. And there's only like 3 hedge funds at the time in this area. So I've cycled through all of them, but I was able to get another job, put one foot in front of the other. And then when the Khan Academy stuff started taking over, it was already 4 or 5 years as a volunteer effort with my family. Once again, these walks or the meditations just allowed me to say, like, and just thinking a little bigger, say, like, there's the patterns that you see your friends and family and other people in Silicon Valley do, where you do a startup and all of that, and that has its own stresses. But wouldn't it be cool if this Khan Academy thing could be like an institution for the world? Wouldn't it be cool if this could be like a new type of thing where it's just like, your great grandkids could one day say, like, yeah, of course everyone should have access to a free world-class education. And it's just thoughts like that, which once again, I think all people are capable of thoughts like that, and all people feel good about thoughts like that. But then their cynical side says, no, that's not realistic. Or remember, money matters. And look, money does matter to some degree. I think, money, you need some level of money to kind of have your, go to a restaurant every now and then, go on vacation, get a basic house, etc. But then after that, it starts to, there's I think, pretty significant diminishing returns. What matters more at that point is that you have a sense of purpose, that you feel good about what you're doing, that you think you have a shot of hopefully impacting other people in a positive way.
For some reason, with your story of walking through the woods, and I think because you mentioned it a couple of times, somehow I feel that the squirrel is really important to you, that somehow seeing a squirrel gives you inspiration to think bigger, larger. So for some reason, I'm taking away the squirrel idea, following squirrels.
Well, that's, I don't have a dog or a cat, but I love pets. I love animals generally. And when you're just hanging out, whether it's a squirrel in some random park, or you're just hanging out with a dog, I think one of the reasons why, I think there's science that shows that it relaxes you, but it's like that dog doesn't know what your performance review was. The dog does not know what your ranking is on some competition. Your dog does not know, what your friends are making.
How many likes you got on something you posted? None of that.
Yeah, your dog just knows you're a warm bag of water who's petting it, and it loves you in some way, and you love it, and that probably is a lot more important than all the other stuff.
Awesome. All right, last question. If you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, What action would you want that to be?
Oh, I'll say two. I'll say for themselves, meditate, but that's going to have, if everyone just meditated 30 minutes a day, like we'd have a different world. Like everyone would just have that pause, be able to do what's right. And then if I had a corollary or a secondary action, I would say everyone does one positive action for someone else every day, however they define it. Then that will all just cycle into, all sorts of positive karma for humanity.
Mm-hmm. There's a beautiful tradition in the Jewish tradition that a pomegranate has 613 seeds. That's just kind of assumed. And actually, a friend of mine once counted, and it was around 600. So that's actually true.
I like having trivia like that. I did not know that.
You're supposed to do 613 mitzvot, good deeds, in a year. And so if you average that out, that's about 2 a day. So it completely fits with your do something that's good. And it just happens to be around the number of seeds in a pomegranate. So there's a lot of old philosophical ideas that completely support your do what's good action.
Yeah, actually, you've motivated me to take my own advice and just like literally try to do at least 2. Like I need to write them down, like, think about it before I go to bed or something like that.
You need to get pomegranates every once in a while to remind you.
I love pomegranate. My mom's name is Gulnar, which in, I think, Persian, Gul Anar is the pomegranate flower. So it's all.
What a nice way to come full circle. Thank you so much, Sal. It's been delightful being with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Enya.